There's a couple different sashes here. This one is made, like I mentioned, like that one over there was made on a machine loom. And I mentioned in the fur trade, sashes initially were probably all finger woven, which needs to be done by hand. Each individual, you basically have the weaving up on a wall or a surface, and then you weave it that way. Whereas you can also weave them on a loom, or you can weave them on a machine loom, which is automatic. And so because the demand for sashes was so high during the fur trade, they started manufacturing them in a neighborhood in Montreal called L'Assomption. So this sash, the red sash with the multiple colors, became a really common pattern and commonly available pattern. And so it was made in Quebec, probably by hand at first, and then I think later by machine, and certainly by machine today. And you'll notice too that the pattern is very lots of diagonal geometry, and this one's a little bit more speckled, and that's because when you weave something on a loom, you can only get a weave that goes it's perpendicular to itself, and so you can't achieve this kind of diagonal pattern with a nice clear line. Whereas when you weave, when you finger weave, the sort of weaving thread that would normally go back and forth across the warp actually changes each time and is always the rightmost thread, and so you kind of get this pattern of that thread sort of following through, and it creates a diagonal weave, and that's how you can make use of that to create these lightning bolt patterns or arrowhead shapes. And this is achieved by these are actually two separate sashes that are woven simultaneously, and that way you take the lightning bolt and turn it into an arrowhead. So it's actually a lightning bolt pattern that's been put together. So the way you set them up in the weaving sticks, and then the way you sort of weave them across creates all the different patterns. So say, for example, you wanted to remember a certain number of things, or you'd gone on a trip and there was something worth remembering, you could record it in these knots. And a lot of the original sashes that are from the fur trade have a series of knots that no one understands the meaning of now, but they clearly have meaning about, maybe this year you did this, or on that trip you found X many of these. And so there would have been meaning to the individual wearer and owner of that sash. And some of the sashes were as large as 10 or 12 feet long and 10 inches wide, so they got quite wide. So when I say that they were used as a towel, you think, how on earth could you use a sash as a towel? But they were quite substantial. I think you could have even used them as a blanket, because they would have been made out of wool, which is a very insulative fiber. They also would have made smaller versions of them, sort of this size, as garters for leggings. So before we had our fancy winter boots, you would have just had like leather or canvas, or perhaps even wool, like felted wool gaiters that you would have put over your boots or your moccasins, and you could have tied those up with a little, like a band at the top, so that would keep them intact. You sometimes see in old fur trade when you see someone in their capote with their sash, and they'll have their leggings tied with a garter, so it's like part of the full kit.